Hello everyone, my name is Susan Windley-Daoust. I'm a Catholic theologian at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. I'm also married and I have 5 kids. And I'm talking to you today about the gift of birth. That is, a spiritual toolbox for childbirth, trying to reclaim childbirth as the spiritual and physical experience that it is for women, and really a great gift from God. So, voila, there I am. There's my name, and let's get started. If you're watching this video, there's a very high likelihood that you're pregnant. Congratulations if that's the case. Or maybe you're hoping to become pregnant. That's an exciting time as well. Or maybe you've recently given birth and you have a little one in arms even as you're watching this video. Congratulations. It's the greatest thing in the world, right? Except when it's not, because sometimes pregnancy comes with all kinds of difficulties, and it always comes with real questions. So what's the problem already, right? Aren't you supposed to be happy? And you may well be, but you may have certain fears as well. I'm going to name a few fears, a few concerns. If any of them resonate with you, tuck that away. Put a little bookmark in that. We're going to talk about it a bit. Some women, when they are pregnant, it really unearths every fear that they have about the actual process of childbirth. I mean, given the way that people joke about it, that older women will give you their great big war stories about how difficult labor was and so forth, it's no wonder. It is a big deal. And there's not always a lot of very positive feedback about the process of giving birth. Or maybe your fears are even bigger than the birth experience. Maybe your fears are about motherhood itself, especially if this is your first child. That's a very common thing. Motherhood changes things. There's just no question about it. And it should. It should. You're entering a new vocational reality. You're entering a new calling from God. And while you will not fundamentally change, you will still be the same person you were before you gave birth. On the other hand, your life is about to change, and your lifestyle is about to change in some really significant ways, and many of them extremely good. But no question, change is hard and change is difficult, and people are very nervous and sometimes fearful about it. So maybe that's your quote-unquote problem. Or maybe you have other problems. Maybe you're encountering all kinds of medical protocols. Maybe you've never been in a hospital before, or been seeing a doctor or a midwife nearly as much as you have in the past few months. It is indeed a brave new world, right? And even though we give thanks to God for all the great things that medical providers can do for us now, on the other hand, it can be very, very disconcerting if you don't have a medical background to walk into those offices, to have these conversations, and to feel really pretty at sea with all the language that's being thrown at you, all the different possibilities of what could go right, what could go wrong, and everything in between. So sometimes just the ground that you're on, the medical establishment is new, and again, causes some fears about how exactly you're going to manage this or negotiate this. Or maybe when it comes right down to it, you just don't know what to do, right? You're about to give birth, and how exactly do you do this thing? For centuries, mothers told their daughters how to give birth, and grandmothers told their granddaughters how to give birth. This was handed down the family line over and over and over again. And that just doesn't happen as much in the United States now for a lot of different reasons, mostly because birth has been taken a little bit more out of the hands of families and into the hands of medical professionals. There are good things about that. There are positive things. But one of the real negative things is that we often quite don't know what we're getting ourselves into, right? So you may be taking the courses that are recommended by your midwife, by your doctor. You may be reading what to expect when you're expecting, and yet, what exactly are you going to do when those contractions start, right? So there are lots of concerns that come with being pregnant. And some would characterize them as problems. Sometimes there are problems, in fact, with the pregnancy itself, in terms of medically how it's going. But let me tell you something. Being pregnant itself, that's not a problem. That's a gift. Giving birth is a gift, and you know, these two women understood that better than possibly any other couple of women on earth. And of course, that is Mary and Elizabeth. At the visitation, Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. The surprise miracle pregnancy in Elizabeth's older age, when she was understood to be infertile. And then, of course, Mary's surprise pregnancy with Jesus being chosen to be the mother of God. And she is going to Elizabeth for sharing, for reassurance. They understood that gift was indeed a great, or that birth was indeed a great gift. It's a gift because it's a vocational experience. Now, depending on where you come from in Catholic land, you may understand vocation pretty much exclusively as a term that you connect with the priesthood or with the religious life, becoming a nun, becoming a brother, a sister, what have you. Those are indeed vocations. But vocation simply means calling. And when you become pregnant, you are called by God to be a mother. Even if the circumstances are such that you give birth to the child, but you're not in a position to care for that child, so you make the decision to put the child up for adoption. That does not really make you any less of a mother. You are making a motherly decision when you do that. You are always that child's birth mother, taking nothing away from that child's adoptive mother. All I'm saying is that motherhood is indeed a vocation. It is a calling from God, and that is always a gift because God gives us vocations for our own good. Giving birth is a foundational experience. Let me tell you, if you talk to women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they may not be teaching us these days how to give birth, but if you ask them, what was the birth of so-and-so like? There isn't a woman alive who is not going to be able to tell you in some considerable detail what that was like. It's a foundational experience. You don't forget it. You can't forget it. It's one of those kinds of experiences. And no, it's not because of the pain. It's because everything in your world really kind of tilts a little bit when you give birth. Things do change. It's a foundational experience. And what I really want you to come away with is that it's a spiritual experience. Of course, it's a physical experience. Of course, there are all kinds of medical things that we should be paying attention to when we're pregnant and giving birth. But it is a spiritual experience, right? Human beings are created as a unity of body and soul. So that is a way of saying that whatever happens to your body, at some level, it touches the soul. It does touch the soul. And this is a spiritual experience because in giving birth, that is an example of a concrete fulfillment, not the end, but a fulfillment of your vocation to be a mother. Yeah? So think about that a little bit. And if the Holy Spirit is the Lord and giver of life, guess who's at your birth? Of course it would be the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit is in many ways the raw power that helps women give birth, the Lord and the giver of life. So at some level you could say that anything you encounter in life, if you look at it the right way, can become a spiritual experience. But on the other hand, childbirth really seems to be set up in a way that it draws us to God. It points us to God. It makes us aware of the Holy Spirit in a way that we typically are not. It can be this if we look at it in the right way. So it's not something to soldier through, people, in order to hold the baby. Childbirth has meaning in and of itself. Okay, if you haven't gotten the idea, this is really influenced by John Paul II's Theology of the Body. And one of the things that I love about the Theology of the Body is this phrase that John Paul II comes up with, that there is a language of the body. And voila, look at this. Look at this picture. Amazing what you'll find on Flickr. And I'm using this with permission. But this is a woman who is in labor. Or maybe she's praying. You can't quite tell, can you? I mean, they look very similar. There's a language to her body right now that really speaks of concentration, right? That really speaks of focus, of humility, prayer, labor, prayer. It's interesting. It's a very similar kind of body language, at least the way that you see it expressed right there. Our bodies are created signs that point to God. If this is true, then it's not a matter of asking whether childbirth has meaning or not. Childbirth must have meaning, right? It must have meaning. And I would say, of course, it does. Now, John Paul II doesn't actually talk about childbirth and, beyond a sentence or two in his audiences that comprise this stuff called the Theology of the Body. He doesn't talk about it. But on the other hand, he talks a lot about sexuality. He talks a lot about marriage. He talks a lot about celibacy for the kingdom of God. And then he says to theologians, now, you go and you apply this to other really primal human experiences. You go and do this. So I think the time is ripe, and maybe even, we're a few years behind, on applying the theology of the body to giving birth. Such a foundational experience experienced by so many women worldwide, and so often named as being one of the most important spiritual events of their lives. Of course, there is a theology of the birthing body as well. So we're going to ask, how does giving birth point to God? And how do we see the Holy Spirit, yes, the Lord, the giver of life, in the act of giving birth? Now, if you've given birth at this point and you're thinking, boy, this sounds really idyllic, right? A very ideal version of birth. Don't worry, I'm not going to say that a spiritual experience is necessarily a blissful, pain-free, everything's hunky-dory kind of experience. Lovely when it is, we give thanks to God. But God is in all of it. Whether it is blissful and pain-free or really challenging and painful, God is there, and birth points to God in some very specific ways. So let's talk a little bit. A lot of this is about allowing the Holy Spirit to work through you in your birth. And guys, that's not a technique. That's a disposition. That's a kind of way of positioning yourself to be open to God. It's an openness when you accommodate the Holy Spirit. When you see the Holy Spirit at work in your birth, when you sense that and you make room, you open yourself. That's a lot of what the book, The Gift of Birth, is about, is trying to make women aware of how to do that. So it's a disposition more than a sort of practical technique. So the first third of the book really is about learning to perceive the Holy Spirit in your life, and specifically in your pregnancy and your giving birth. So I'm just going to give you an analogy. Bird watching. I'm not a bird watcher, but I'm friends with people who are. And when we go bird watching together, there's a remarkable difference, because I'm walking through the woods and I hear birds and I don't see them. I'm looking all over the place. I don't know where they are. And I can hear them, right? That's something. But I'm mostly just out for a nice walk in the woods. But people who are bird watchers, oh man, they know, right? They know where to look. They hear the bird call and it's like, oh, that's a so-and-so, a female, and probably doing this. I mean, they've got very specific. They know exactly where to look to find the bird. If they see birds in flight, they could tell by the way that they're flying, even if it's far off, what kind of bird it is. They're just amazing at it. I'm not. But the reality is, for both of us, we're in the same place and we're seeing the same thing. They can see the birds. I can't see the birds. So part of it is learning about where to look. You know, not just for birds, but in this case for the Holy Spirit. Where do you look for the Holy Spirit? It's true that the Holy Spirit himself is going to teach you where to look for his presence. The Holy Spirit wants to be known to you. But on the other hand, it's also helpful to know what other people in faith have found about where the Holy Spirit seems to be most visible to us, right? I'm going to suggest that there are really 3 spiritual keys that help us be aware of the Holy Spirit and cooperate with the Holy Spirit in the process of giving birth. And those 3 spiritual keys are kind of like the binoculars that you would use to go bird watching. Only in this case, they're the binoculars you're going to use to go birth watching. Yeah, I kill myself. That was funny. All right. So that's the first third of the book. The second third of the book is really very practical and goes through the stages of giving birth, looking at them with this kind of spiritual lens, or binoculars, if you will. And so each stage has its own chapter for you to reflect upon and think about, what will I do if this happens? What could I do if that happens? And so forth. Because on one hand, with every woman, birth looks more or less the same. And at the very same time, every birth is different. You know, no birth is absolutely textbook. So the second third of the book goes through that. And then the last third of the book addresses a whole variety of situations when childbirth simply does not go as you would hope. And these can be some pretty difficult cases, or they can be just some very unexpected things. But, you know, obviously miscarriage is a real sorrow for most, if not all, women. Medical complications can be challenging. Even when there are ways to overcome it, they can be challenging on all kinds of levels. Postpartum depression is not nearly talked about enough. It is a real challenge and reality for lots of women who have recently given birth and so forth. So the last third of the book deals with some of those issues. So what I'd like to do is just quickly go through these 3 spiritual keys to give you a taste of the sort of dispositional work that we try to go over in this book, okay, in this kind of meditative, reflective, sort of retreat style book, a little bit at a time. Read it, on one chapter a night, very short, with a few questions to reflect upon. The first spiritual key is to relax. Fantastic. This is going to be great. That looks relaxing to me. Calgon, take me away, right? Okay, it's actually really hard to relax. Have you ever noticed that? It is. It's very hard to relax. Maybe more for some than others. But for every woman who's giving birth, it is a real challenge to relax. And yet it's incredibly important. This whole spiritual key is actually give God permission to work in your life and relax. And what does that mean? Well, it comes from a priest, Father Bob Sears. He's a Jesuit in Chicago. He came up with that line, give God permission to work in your life and relax. And when I first heard it, I thought it was a little simplistic, even kind of flighty. And it wasn't too long before I realized it was actually pretty darn genius. Very smart. Why is it so smart? Because every time that you say, God, I give you permission to work in my life, you are deliberately announcing your openness to God and to God's will. You are saying you are ready to receive the Holy Spirit. You know, it's one thing to have it in your head, and it's another thing to say it, to write it, or to say it out loud, to whisper it. If you open every day during your pregnancy with the words, God, I give you permission to work in my life, you know, sit back and see what's going to happen. Of course, God doesn't need your permission to work in your life, but he wants your permission because he doesn't want to force his will on you. You have that freedom, that incredible and sometimes terrible freedom to be open to God or to shut God out. And this is just a really concrete way of being open to God. Well, where does the relaxation come in? The relaxation comes in is that, you know, if we are unity of body and soul, when we physically relax, and you can learn how to do this. You can force yourself to do this, right? Tense a muscle, untense. Tense a muscle, untense. You learn what being relaxed can feel like, even if you don't easily do it. When you are relaxed, you know, your body and soul working together, you know, you underscore that prayer. You underscore that prayer. You say, God, I give you permission to work in my life. Whew. Relax now. Because you can, right? God is taking care of things. God is a giver of good gifts. It's providential. Love itself. You can relax even when the circumstances are hard. There's no better place to be than in God's hands. So give God permission to work in your life and relax. The second spiritual key, cooperate with God. And really the whole key is cooperate with God's intention to realize your motherhood through your body now. I chose a picture of an open hand here because if the first key about giving God permission to work in your life and relaxing, that first key is all about receiving, right? You're declaring your openness to receiving the Holy Spirit. This second key is really about giving, and that hand is both in a position to receive and to give, right? Yeah. Receive and to give away. One of the elements of motherhood is that to be a mother means to welcome your child and make room for him or her in your life. Okay. And that requires an incredible amount of self-giving on your part. And not just after the child is born, really it begins with the pregnancy, right? You are giving your body in order for this child to grow and to live. You give room and you cooperate by doing what you can to nurture this unborn child. Frankly, in terms of giving birth, I'm not sure that there is or are many more concrete examples of self-gift on the planet. In terms of a language of the body, giving birth is, in fact, all about self-gift. The third spiritual key is practicing yielding to the Holy Spirit. Yield. Okay, it's not quite like you're on the freeway. It's usually going to be a great deal more gentle than that because that's how God works. But it is the third spiritual key. Practice yielding to the Holy Spirit. Now, some of you may be familiar with the word docility, practicing docility to the Holy Spirit. If you like that word, fantastic. That's what I'm going for. Yielding is a little bit different, but similar enough and more familiar to most people. Yielding, after all, means to bend or give way. If you're yielding on a highway, you're making sure that the other car can go first, right? Okay, that's a kind of giving way. To yield in some other contexts just simply means to bend a little bit to make room for another, to give the other the right of the way. You're going to do a lot of yielding when you give birth. You know? And what you want to yield to is the Holy Spirit himself. That's an awesome and remarkable thing. The Holy Spirit is indeed the Lord and giver of life, as we say every Sunday in the Creed. Mothers yield to the power of the Holy Spirit through how we handle the contractions and the pushing, the basic and hard work of being in labor. So there are all kinds of concrete acts in giving birth that we can do to try to yield to the work of God in this event. It makes a difference to not just suffer the contractions, but to work with them, to cooperate with them in a way that it feels like you are actually yielding to the power of God in these contractions to help you deliver this child. And the great thing about these spiritual keys, they're not just about birth. You might have noticed that already, eh? If you pray for an increased ability to yield to the Holy Spirit, first off, it's a beautiful act of Christian discipleship. And secondly, it will undoubtedly bear fruit before, during, and beyond the birthing event. Because yielding to the Holy Spirit really is key to being a disciple of Jesus Christ. Well, folks, I promise this would be a very short presentation, but if you're interested, there's a lot more where that came from. It's in this book, and it's published by Grace Watch Media. If you're at a convention, it's at the Grace Watch Media table. You could also order it on the Grace Watch Media website at gracewatch.media/shop, or you can get it on Amazon and other such online retailers. If you're interested in having me speak, I do retreats on this. Feel free to invite me, ask for my card, and I greatly appreciate your attention, and thank you for coming. God bless you, your child, and your birth experience.